Is the midlife crisis just a developmental step, or is there a way that it's avoided?
Today we have Shana James with us, who is a dating and relationship coach focused on love, intimacy, and sex after 40.
I do think it just is actually a natural phase of development, but similar to so many other things in our culture where we don't talk about them.
Shana, what you were saying, maybe it's the opposite.
And our second guest is Silvan Summers, who works with men who feel stuck, disconnected, or overwhelmed in midlife.
We're in this pattern of maintaining material things, and we start to lose track of what's really important. So being able to pause, I really want to meet somebody and go deep with that person. I think we'll have a family, get them emotional thinking about it. We start to realize, like, oh, maybe half my life is over. Like, wow, where did it go? And how do I want to spend the rest of it?
I think it's inevitable, but I do think it just is actually a natural phase of development. But if you have the house, if you have the career, but then you start feeling dull inside, you don't reach some of those goals.
Yeah, but let's just dive right in. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc, and we're here for another one of our roundtable episodes. We have two wonderful guests that you've heard before that you'll see as they introduce themselves. We have tons of stuff from them on our blogs, on our website. You can check them out. But this month, we're going to be talking about midlife crisis. So this is actually the first roundtable that we did. And we're going to go a little bit deeper this time. We're going to talk about how midlife can be an initiation. And for those of you who don't know what that word is, stay tuned because it's really, really exciting. So let's start with some introductions. So Shana, can you start us off?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Shana James, and I am a dating and relationship coach, and I really focus on love and sex after 40. So tends to be that midlife range where most of our dreams and fantasies in some ways have shattered. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to create really incredible love and sex, I think, beyond anything we can create when we're younger, because we do have these depths, or like you said, there's a kind of initiation where we find what's real. We stop settling, we stop um, trying to please others and trying to be who we think we should be. And so there's an incredible opportunity, I think, in midlife. I love this topic, the midlife. Is it a crisis, or what is it really? So I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, you're an awesome voice, and I love that you're a part of the MTO ecosystem. Listeners, her blog on sex after divorce is one of her most popular ones. So check that out. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. If you're in that case, it's a really great thing to read. Just help you get some hope and some orientation. And she has a wonderful book called Honest Sex that we'll also put a link to in the show notes if you want to hear more from Shana. Silvan, how about you? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Silvan Summers. I'm a therapeutic coach here at Men's Therapy Online, and I also have a private practice here in Boulder, Colorado. My background is in somatic psychotherapy or body-based psychotherapy and movement therapy. So basically helping people use their body as a resource for their mind. And there's research that comes out every day of how helpful exercise is for our mental health, for instance. So integrating things like that, but also this piece of how basically we experience emotion through sensation in the body. And so if we have an understanding of what those sensations are, we can have more control over where we let our emotional experience go and where we want to spend time and where we don't.
Awesome.
And I think that's a big part of midlife. If you're really grabbing it, is that we start to have a sense of more of like reflecting and what is it that we really want, and have more discernment in our life.
Yeah, but let's just dive right in, man. I mean, I love that topic. Let's talk about that, right? My first question for the two of you is, what is the midlife crisis and what really breaks during midlife? And Silvan, I'm hearing you talking a little bit about disconnection, right? About a sense of numbness. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think we get in habits, and and a lot of it, to be truthful, I think has to do with this kind of like myth of like, the American dream, like maybe we got the relationship and we got the family and we got the nice house and we got the nice cars, and we're in this pattern of maintaining all of these material things, and we start to lose track of like what's really important, and we're just kind of in the routine and in the grind, and we got to pay the mortgage or whatever, So being able to pause, like midlife, we start to realize like, oh, maybe half my life is over. Like, wow, where did it go? And how do I want to spend the rest of it?
I love this. I get so excited. That sense of like what is actually really important to me versus what was I trained or expected to do. I think this is often a time where we wake up and there is a kind of a reckoning like, oh shit, I'm human. I'm not going to live forever. And, you know, like you said, Sylvan, it's like all the things that you were kind of on track to do. If you have the house, if you have the career, if you have that, but then you start feeling exhausted or like kind of numb or dull inside, or things aren't actually feeling alive to you, is one way it can happen. Or it can be that you don't reach some of those goals and there is devastation and heartbreak. Or, you know, for me, there was divorce in my midlife. And all of those things, I think, can either lead to a crisis or can open a doorway for this deeper, fuller, more true experience of life. And that's where I love to go.
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious for each of you, whether it be through that somatic body based lens, or, what does it feel like? I guess is my question. What does it feel like? What does it look like both internally or behaviorally when someone is starting to creep towards that midlife crisis moment?
I mean, I was going to say it feels like sometimes it can show up as anxiety, like worry, a lot of worry, a lot of fear. Sometimes it's more depressive, where it's just like, ugh, the gray or even deep dark. I mean, I even as my hormones have been changing, different for men, of course, but we all go through these hormonal changes, and the perimenopause change for me, I was just like, where is my usual joy? Like I couldn't find joy. I would, be doing all the things I love to do. And it was kind of just like, ugh, none of this is hitting anymore. And so some of that was actual physical chemical changes, but some of that was also rerouting and really choosing and aligning, like, what is it that actually does feel alive to me, instead of where all the ways that I've thought I should go down this track. And then I love, Sylvan, what you're saying too, like the body. For me, the body is the guide, because I can ask myself questions. Does this or this, like which one actually feels better in my body? And there is either an uplift or a kind of downfall. Usually yes is up and no is down. But for you listening, I really encourage, like, start to pay attention to what your body is telling you, because your body and your heart will more whisper at you, and your mind has the the usual track, but it's often where a lot of the wisdom comes from.
Yeah, Sylvan, what do you think? What's the kind of like internal experience of going through this crisis?
I think it's a like uncertainty. That's what it feels like to me. It's like maybe did I make right choices that led me to this place? And I want to put a plug in for Shana, what you're saying, about maybe it's the opposite, of like you have the house and the family and the job and everything. Maybe it's like, in my case, actually personally, like it was the opposite. I was speaking more for like a lot of the clients that we work with, I feel like, Marc, but that's not everybody that we work with. So for me, I was like, I spent a lot of my first half of my life, like deepening into my own personal understanding of myself and spirituality and things like that. I spent a year in retreat at a Buddhist meditation center, and also just having a good time, doing a lot of traveling, and then at some point I was like, around 40, I was like, is this how I want to spend the rest of my life? And I think I've had a good time up to this point, and actually, no, I really want to meet somebody and go deep with that person, and I think we'll have a family, give them emotional thinking about it. And I think there was a big part of me that was like, maybe I'm never going to have that. And partially because I didn't focus on that for a large period of my life. But actually, I think especially before 40, I was already doing a lot of work that helped me to be able to create that for myself. I had a lot of different 3-year long relationships, spaces in between there where I wasn't even dating people for years and stuff, but learned. And a lot of guys that we work with, Mike, have this kind of nice guy tendency that you talk about a lot, and realized that was what was going on. I was kind of getting in my own way by trying to be too accommodating for people so they would stay connected with me. And in that sense, I wasn't actually showing up authentically. And I think that's a big part of midlife too, is like being able to notice, like, okay, when am I showing up authentically? And for me, the body sensation there is like, oh, there's energy there. There's like an uprightness, I'm not just in the grind, getting through every day to day and starting to kind of just head down, get through. There's a sense of energy and inspiration there that I think is lacking for people sometimes when they get to midlife.
I was going to pick up on the uncertainty piece really quick, which is, well, first of all, thank you for being vulnerable, Silvan, and it just warms my heart, right, that you're here being an example for men that this is how we can do this. Everything is welcome, the tears and all of it. And it feels to me like there's a choice point in the uncertainty and in the questioning ourselves. It's like we can either beat ourselves up or make ourselves wrong and be like, oh, how did I get here with this? Why isn't my business the way I wanted to, or financial or relationship? Or there is the other path, which I think we're recommending, right, of this curiosity and checking in with your deeper body wisdom and really looking at what is it that is important to you right now. And instead of trying to make others happy and do the people pleasing, right, what is it that really matters to you?
Yeah. I think the authenticity is what I'm hearing both of you just continuing to talk about, right? It's like becoming more authentic. And there's just something about the fear of death, or mortality being there that I think is really clarifying for people, right? Like you said, being like, okay, I'm halfway done. Now what? And I hope, like you said, you're advocating facing it. I think both of you have faced it. You're great models for some of our listeners, because what I've seen the other way is that guys can ignore it. They can start drinking, they can start having an affair, they can, let their bodies go, right? Continue to create those barriers between themselves and reality. And it becomes something that eventually, the dam breaks. But the hope is that by listening to this show and by working with us, you kind of get ahead of that. It doesn't have to be so bad. But, on that note, I'm curious for each of you, if you have, maybe client examples or from your own life, or maybe just men in general, what are some of the ways that guys numb out, right? What are ways that some guys avoid that authenticity? Because I just see that so common in our culture is we're not trained or taught or encouraged to be honest even. We're trained to put on a face, put on a role, and just perform day after day. Like you were saying, Sylv, like putting that head down and just like trudging through life. And it can often take a pretty stark experience to shake somebody out of that.
I mean, count the ways, like you name it there. If we're doing it, as men, I'm like, we're just, to me, it comes down to not feeling, like we're just taught to not feel, in our culture. It's just like, in a lot of Western culture, it's like, you're just like, yeah, it's put your head down and do the work and get through it and man up and get through it. And, I think most of us are realizing at this point that, like, actually that's not a very sustainable model, and for a lot of guys, they've done that up till 40. And then they're like, oh shit, like I have all of this pent up emotion that I haven't experienced, and I'm trying to cover it up and just push it down. They've been telling me my whole life I'm supposed to not feel, and I'm still trying to not feel. And now I have alcoholism, and now I'm like not connected with my wife, and we're not having sex. And then that's often when guys start to wake up and be like, oh, something's maybe not right here. But, it doesn't have to get to that point necessarily, of the drug use or the alcohol or, screen addiction, whatever it is, So the guys out there that are listening and you're like, oh, maybe I'm headed towards midlife and I'm wondering, I should get some assistance or something, like, give us a call, man, because it's a lot easier to work before your life blows up,
Yeah.
And if it has blown up, give us a call then too, and we can help. I mean, but unfortunately, it seems like, in my experience, Mark, tell me what yours is like. Guys usually they wait till the very last possible second to get help, and that's a part of it. Our culture too. We're supposed to just this kind of myth of individualism, kind of cowboy individualism. We're just supposed to do it all on our own, and we're all supposed to be able to do it all on our own, like maintain the finances for the family, take care of the kids, be available emotionally to our spouse. Like we're supposed to do it all on our own. It's just not possible. It's not realistic.
No, it's so much pressure. And I mean, I can't speak for men, but I will say as a single parent, I've often had that sense of like, oh shit, it's all on me. And I feel like it helps me understand some of the struggles that men go through. And that sense of what you were saying, like men tend to wait because it is more vulnerable, right? If we're honest, I think I'm curious what you two would say, but it is more vulnerable to reach out and get help, especially when you've been taught your whole life that you're supposed to man up and handle it on your own and suck it up. And, it's more vulnerable to put yourself out there and say what you really want as opposed to just going along with what's happening. Misery is sometimes better than uncertainty, but at some point that changes. And I've walked so many men, hundreds of men, thousands, I don't know, men through this process of really seeing, oh, I can come back to myself. And sometimes my marriage or relationship will stay with me. And sometimes not. Sometimes it has to fall away. But either way, I can find my own sovereign self and not abandon myself and create an amazing life, from there.
Yeah, I think what a lot of guys struggle, what I see, I'm curious what you two think about this, is like we're so like duty and honor and commitment bound. And kind of to your point, Shannon, it's like we're taking on all these commitments, right? Like maybe we're getting married and we're supporting, a partner and a child, a couple of kids, we're getting on these commitments at work. We're going up the ladder and now we're managing teams and we're involved with moving money around and dealing with these big projects. We've bought a house, Silvan, you're talking about, we have a mortgage, right? And we're like in this sense of rootedness. And I see a lot of these guys when they start to wake up, there's this huge counterforce of like, are you going to really give up everything you've worked for just because of your feelings? Like just because you upset? And the answer is like, yeah, you probably should. But I think as men, we can dismiss those feelings so much. And we don't want to let other people down, especially if we're that nice guy archetype, or we've been a people pleaser, or we've been, rewarded for being productive and successful. I know it's the same, and Shana, you can certainly speak to this from your work of like divorce, right? Of like people that want to keep it together for the kids, where it's like, well, I've already invested so much, I don't want to, I can't afford to listen to me to be my own person because of all these, ties that I have to my family. And I see that really, really hurting men, and I mean people in general, but for this conversation, really hurting men, that sense of honor and responsibility and that kind of masculine thing, which is good to be like consistent and dependable. But I think we get stuck in that. I think as a man, it's harder to say like, oh, I'm done being executive and I want to be a teacher now, or I want to go be a surf instructor, or I really want to get into my passion of working with like disenfranchised youth, which is all good. But I think our culture is like, why? You're already successful. Like you already have money. You got the car, you got everything. Like, why would you go backwards? It's difficult, I think, for men to really understand that, and they may end up losing
as though it's
that.
backwards, right? Like as though your own
It's failure.
personal well-being and fulfillment, A, is backwards. And B,
Yes.
can I just say one thing? Because it's very black and white the way you're laying it out, right? Where it's like, it's either this or that. You if you discover your feelings, you have to leave your job or your career. And I just want to put in the more nuanced gray in between. Like I'm often looking at what is the middle way? And you can feel this in your body too. If I'm on one end of the spectrum, I'm collapsing. On the other end of the spectrum, I'm kind of posturing. I don't know if you can see my hand. And then right in the middle, like, what is that middle way where I don't have to blow it all up or leave everything behind? Maybe it's I start to have a conversation with someone around, if I was really doing what I wanted to be doing right now, it would be this. But I don't have to get there tomorrow or even a year from now. Like how do we let ourselves, start to change course without how we don't have to blow it all up. And I think that's if there's so much intensity and we haven't been listening to ourselves at all, that's the tendency is like, oh shit, now I got to go the whole other way. But just to remind that we can take one step at a time also.
Yeah, and I think that's like what we encourage is like small but meaningful change. I think when it hits that crisis point, it becomes the total blow up. It becomes the like, pull the e-brake and just like skid away. And it can often lead to a lot of destruction, you know? But what I'm curious what you all think about that, call it some cost fallacy, call that overinvestment, call it like, being attached to that old identity. How do you see that show up in the men that you work with? If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
I mean, just, it's really hard to change old habits, neurological patterns, and so especially if you've been in a relationship for 40 years, and even if you're not thinking about leaving the relationship, just thinking about asking more from your partner, more from what you want, can be like this huge thing. Because like, oh, what if they don't give it to me? Or what if they get upset and they give me less of what I do want that they're already giving me? I mean, it's hard. It's hard to change. And the kids piece, like if you have kids, that's a whole another piece, and especially, I wrote a blog on this recently, about like, when is it possible that divorce can be good for your kids, in some ways. And I think if there's really high conflict in the relationship and you've done a lot of couples counseling and you can't work through it, then maybe it is better for the kids, But especially up until 5, it's really difficult for kids to go through divorce, even if there's a lot of conflict, After 5, kids have a little bit more understanding of what's going on. They don't internalize things as much. So it's a little bit easier the older your kids get. But so many times I hear people saying like, oh, we're just not happy, but we're just going to stay until the kids graduate from high school. And like, man, that's like 10 more years of your life or 15 more years of your life or something, So, okay, if that's what you're committed to, then like also like be committed to your relationship and really getting the most that you can out of the person that you're with in that relationship, so that you both are feeling good together as good as you can,
I think that's the middle road too, is like, okay, the one side, we're going to stay until the kids go to college. On the other side, now that I realize this is not working, I'm going to leave now or have an affair or something. And then the middle road is, okay, how do I start to ask for more of what I want? Like you said, yes, it's scary. I think it often goes back to trusting oneself also. And so, okay, do I believe that I am worthy of having something, that feels more fulfilling or feels more meaningful? And can I find the place in myself where I can ask for what I want without apologizing or without blaming or attacking someone else, right? It's a different conversation when you're like, why the hell aren't we having sex, versus, wow, I notice I really want to have an amazing sex life. And I'm curious what would be exciting for you. And I want to share what would be exciting for me, right? There's all these, some of it takes guidance and support and some skill building in there. But I think you don't have to give up on yourself. And the more you recognize your own sovereignty and start to trust yourself, those conversations become way more natural and easier. I don't know if they're ever easy, but they are easier.
I'm curious, from the two guys we're talking, do you think this is inevitable? Like, is the midlife crisis just like a developmental step that humans go through and we just frame it as like a crisis or a bad thing or whatever? Or is there a way that it's avoided if you live more in integrity? But what's your thoughts on that?
I was going to say, I think it's inevitable, but I do think it just is actually a natural phase of development, but similar to so many other things in our culture where we don't talk about them.
Mhm.
Then I think it becomes this inevitable crisis, we call it, right? Because it's like, we don't talk about death. We don't talk about emotions. We don't talk about love. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about money.
The
We
list
talk about
goes
all
on.
things, right? And then there's crisis. But
Yeah.
I think if you're raised from the beginning to create a relationship with yourself, listen to yourself, trust yourself, create conscious relationships with other people, my hope is that you don't have to go through this, maybe this generation, they won't have a crisis. But I think I would imagine there's always, curious what you say, Sylvan, but I would imagine there's always some kind of reckoning as you're kind of getting to that point of recognition of, oh, wow, this is not going to last forever. And I might be halfway through my life, but I could die any day, actually. I mean, while that's always true, it's much more likely now after midlife. So I think there is a reckoning that starts to set in.
Yeah. I don't think that the exact midlife crisis is like so obvious for everybody. For some people it is. I think a lot of the guys we work with, it's pretty obvious because they just get to a point and that they haven't dealt with things for so long. But yeah, I don't think it has to be that way. I think if your reflection, if you're more reflective over your life, then it's maybe a little easier transition. I wouldn't say that I necessarily had a midlife crisis, but I just definitely had a point, around 40, where I was like, okay, what do I want the rest of my life to be like?
Right.
And just a plug for my single guys out there. It's like I felt like, oh, a big part of what I want is like I don't want to do this all by myself.
Yeah.
I'm hearing that there is that kind of like reckoning, maybe like an audit, right? There's like a moment where you just look at your different categories and it's like, okay, it's now or never, And I think guys are going to be behind on one or two categories no matter what, right? Whether it's, like you
Yes.
said, relationship or it's sexuality or it's spirituality or it's finances or it's, having a career, right? I think no one's perfect. And you get to that point and you're like, okay, now I need to either deal with these kind of deficiencies or crash out, Because I do think even though there is a lot of pressure, I think as men or as just modern humans, we have to be competent in most categories, right? I mean, I think our culture can be pretty unforgiving in some ways. So you have to kind of reach some level of like mediocrity at least. And I think you can really see those deficiencies when you get down to 40. And there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you take responsibility
Right.
and get help to bring whatever your category is up into a level of competency.
Yeah. And if it's normalized, then we don't think there's something wrong with it, right? What if it was like, hey, at this age, similar to you're going to go off to school or you're going to make these choices and then you're going to come back around at a certain age and question, am I still on the right path or what do I want to shift and change? That would be a whole different ballgame. If that was our cultural, orientation.
Yeah, and hopefully, the work that we're all doing is helping to make that more normalized of like, it's fine, We're gonna help you live the best life you can. I'm curious, we talked about, or I guess I pitched the word initiation at the beginning of this episode, right? And for listeners, if you're not familiar with that word, basically initiation is kind of like a coming of age. It's like this idea where you go through a really intense experience and you come out not just changed, but almost reborn, almost as like a new version of yourself. And it involves grief because you're often letting go of that, past version, and also a lot of hope and kind of a quantum shift, right? You have like a whole new way of looking at the world, and looking at yourself, but you do have to let things go. So I'm curious for the two of you, if you see midlife as initiation and if there's any kind of like spiritual parallels, or psychological parallels that you want to make, kind of as we start to normalize this as like a developmental step, moving from, I don't know, adulthood to older adulthood, I guess. I mean, you're not an elder yet, but maybe you're definitely an adult
Yeah.
at 40.
Yeah.
You can't pretend anymore. So maybe it's going from like young adult to full adult at that age.
I had an insight recently so I'm 49 and I had this insight recently that I was still living as like the maiden mother. And now I recognize like, oh, I'm actually more in the mother crone phase, which the crone is like, the older adult, kind of that, the elder in a way. And, I'm straddling it still. Right. But I did have this realization recently that I was like, oh, I'm still judging myself based on the standards of the maiden versus more the mother and the crone. And it was so freeing to me to see that, there are different things that are important in different phases of life. And things that were important to me back then are not as important now, but I was still trying to go after some of them. And that discrepancy was really painful. So yeah, I do think there's also there's a kind of a young adult to adult, or maybe it's prince to king for men.
Yeah.
And there's also just the more conscious, like if we look at the level of consciousness, going deeper into our soul or our spirit. I mean, oftentimes I think in the Indian culture, there's the householder, and then oftentimes people, after raising the children is done, then they move into a spiritual practice and going deeper into the soul dimensions. So yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it.
Yeah, I think this kind of piece of like, can I avoid the midlife crisis? And I think I think maybe you can avoid the crisis, but you can't really avoid the reflection of midlife. I feel like that's unavoidable. You can't avoid the fact that we're all going to die. So I think one of the things that's unavoidable, right? And we can try to numb out as much as we want through drinking or watching a million YouTube videos about random things, or eject by having an affair or something like that. But it's always going to catch up with us in the end, because you're talking about this later stage of life, like Erik Erikson. People are familiar with kind of human stages of development. He talks about like midlife, kind of 40 to 65, is your generative versus stagnation, right? And I think that's where we kind of start to reflect: is my life generative, or do I feel kind of stagnant right now? And so the generative piece is like, are you creating? Are you nurturing things that are going to be around long after you're gone? Are you making like a positive contribution to society? And you might be working, you might have made good money, but you might not feel like you've made much of a contribution to society. And there's that piece of like, that's, if you feel like there's something lacking in your experience at midlife, it might have something to do with that. And for some people, raising a family and being really present there is enough of that kind of contribution. But oftentimes people want to contribute more than that to really feel fulfilled. And yeah, if you numb out, in 40 to 65, at some point you're going to get to this age where, he talks about 65 and above is this kind of like integrative versus, or being, having integrity, like we already talked about, right? Versus being in despair, right? So if you think of older people that they're probably in one of two of those camps, and if they're in the despair place, they probably numbed out midlife a lot, or earlier, and it's caught up with them, it's caught up with them. So that's the opportunity, according to Erikson, to lean into wisdom when you're older, kind of 65 and above, and you're starting to reflect on your life, and you feel a sense of fulfillment, or regret, right? And so if you don't want to live your whole life and then have a bunch of regret, like midlife is a great time to evaluate things, and start to be more discerning with where you want to spend your energy and what's important to you. Like a good example, I think, is my grandfather. I think it's impressive that he only had one regret at the end of his life. I was really lucky and got to spend a lot of time with him towards the end of his life. And but his one regret towards the end of his life was that he didn't spend enough time with his kids.
Yeah. So focus on those things that really matter, right? And those things that like you can't get that time back.
Yeah, and it's like when the stresses, if you're not stressed, I know for me, again, being the sole provider, at times it's like the stress of money can have me forget what's really important, or that I might look back at the end of my life and, wish that I had spent more time with my loved ones, or just not stressed about things as much. But that's hard to do when you're doing it alone too, right? When you're on your own and you're not talking about it with anyone and everything's building up. that's way harder to have that perspective, or even a moment to take that perspective, or to imagine from the end of your life what you would regret looking back, right? If you're just numbing out or nose to the grindstone or feeling so alone in it, you're less likely to look.
Yeah, yeah. So important. If we're single, or especially if we're single parenting, to have that extra support, reach out, get that support to even help us just reflect on, like, what's the next step? What is it that I want?
Mhm.
As opposed to just kind of survival mode.
Yeah. It's another plug for like the role of elders. We'll do a roundtable on that in the new year for sure. But needing to be in contact with our elders, like you said, with your grandfather, right? With parents that are further down the road, with community leaders, right? People that have been there that can teach these lessons to us from experience. We just sequester our elders away and we don't get to learn from them. So we end up kind of falling in the same holes. I'm curious as you're talking. I like that. I think both of you are bringing up this idea that on the other side of this initiation is new things, right? New things are more valuable. New skills need to be learned. New things need to be focused on, right? It's more emotional. It's more spiritual. It's more community based, right? It's not so much about sexiness and power and attractiveness and acquiring all the coins in the world. And I think that's where our culture also falters, is that stereotype of the guy who buys the sports car, right? Or who, divorces and goes and marries someone 20 years younger. It's like trying to go back, right? Trying to go back to an earlier stage of things that were important when you're in your 20s, but are not going to be important when you're in your 60s. So I'm curious for each of you, what do you think are some of the new things that men need to embrace as they enter into that next stage, rather than just kind of turn back the clock, and doubling down on stuff that used to work for them but won't moving forward?
And I think the initiation really, at midlife, with a lot of guys that we work with, is man, dude, just feel. And there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain there for a lot of guys. So that's the initiation, and that's like facing the midlife or the midlife crisis like head on. Don't hit the eject button. Don't numb out. Like, man up and actually feel some really intense stuff. That has been buried maybe for a long time.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that, because I'm all about that, right? I think what that teaches men is humility, right? Being like, wow, my story wasn't perfect. There was some shitty things about my childhood. There were some regrets that I have. There were some places where I actually failed. And I never really let myself feel that or even acknowledge that. I would just head down, pretending I was the man, pretending I was kicking ass the whole time. But if you don't take inventory of that, if you don't learn like the virtue of humility, you're born to stay stuck. You're going to stay stuck in the life that you were in, rather than trying to find a new creative solution.
I think the other flip side of that feeling is also like, feeling the difficult stuff, but also like feeling where you are a badass too, and really leaning into that and appreciating, looking back over the last 40 years, like, where did I really show up? And then taking some of that momentum into the next stage.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that next stage. You were talking about like what else becomes possible. Um, can we talk about sex for a minute?
Of course. That's
Okay,
why
if
you're
I
on the
go there.
show.
Okay. Because I think this is not, I don't want to make this all about sex, what else is possible, but sex is often a really concrete way to see what else is possible in other areas that are a little more invisible, right? And so I think of the difference between sex when you're young, which often is very just, the physicality. Like you can have an erection at any time, often, not everybody, but it's like it can be easier to um just get in and go. And I think what becomes possible later is a slowing down and a tuning to each other, which then creates some of these more intimate, more healing, more blissful experiences, that it's like this whole new dimension opens up. And I think that happens in life too, where it's like the things you do may not change. I mean, some of the things when I kind of started going through midlife, it was like, oh, I really want to garden, or I want to be with the earth, or I want to like paddleboard because I want to be on the water. Like things that did certain things, interest changed. But other things, it was more like, I want to do these same things, but I actually want to be present to how precious these moments are, or how precious the person across from me is. So it might be like, I'm still going to go have coffee with people, but I'm going to have real conversations where we actually check in about how we're really doing, instead of we're going to shoot the shit and talk about weather or where we traveled or things like that. Not that you can't do that, right? But that the depth and the intimacy, I think, is part of what becomes more possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think sex is a great example. I just wanted to kind of pop off on that a little bit more. But what I see with a lot of my guys, right, it's like, again, they're doing that adolescent version of sex, which is
Yes.
about, conquest, right? It's often all about like boosting their own self-esteem, right? Feeling that they're valuable, that they're desirable, that they can get the girl, and those are all very adolescent things. As a man, I think you need to do that, in your 20s or, whatever, to feel competent in that realm. But if you're wondering why you're not having sex with your wife anymore, it's because that's not attractive to
Not the
her,
kind of sex
right?
that
It's
people
not what
want to
she
have later in
wants.
life, that women want to have. Yeah.
Yeah, and the women are often way more intuitive, and they're in tune of like, wow, this sex is a lot for him, about him feeling powerful or dominating or whatever. But what about me? Like, why is he still trying to conquer me? He has me. I'm here. Like, let's do something different. And I think it really fizzles out if guys can't, pivot to that different type of sex that you're talking about.
Yeah. And there can be a kind of conquering too, or a leading, or a being dominant or whatever, but it's conscious instead of unconscious, right? So it's like we're actually in a relational, we're both aware of each other and we're co-creating it. And therefore it can go so much deeper and be so much hotter, because we're actually there paying attention, rather than I'm doing this so that I am cool, or so that I have another notch in the belt or something like that.
Yeah, it's more of a dance, right? And less of like a formula. 'Cause I think that's also when guys, we have our formula to get laid and it worked. But when you run that formula, hundreds of times with the same woman, he starts to figure it out. It's a lot less, yeah, it's not connective. It's just robotic.
I mean, that brings you back to the old Erickson, like the kind of virtue of midlife is care.
Mm.
And so we learn how to care. Ideally, we're caring for ourselves and like letting ourselves feel and learn to navigate the range of emotions that we have. And also like being able to ask for what we want. We're also like encouraging if we're in a relationship, encouraging our partners to ask us for what they want, So there's that mutual care there. If you have kids, really learning to show up and like, when can I let this work thing go, and and really be with my kids? Because you don't want to end up like my grandpa, in his 80s being like, man, that's the only thing I wish I did different was basically care a little bit more about spending time with my kids and put that more in the forefront.
Yeah, you can't get that time back. You can't rewind that.
Or care a little bit more about my partner, and show up and ask them. Maybe I've never even asked them what they want when we're having sex, And if you're single, care for yourself, care for your friends, like how are you showing up for your friends? How are you showing up for your family?
Love that.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online. So we've talked a bit about how it goes wrong, right? But I want to spend, the last portion of this talking about how it can go right. So from each of your perspectives, like, what does a well-navigated midlife looks like? And if you could think of anything to give to our listeners, maybe it's an introspection prompt, maybe it's an activity, maybe it's something just to, think about. What does it look like when it's done well, when it's done, guided, and it can create, the initiation can be completed successfully?
I mean, truthfully, I think the number one is just be man enough to ask for support.
Yeah.
Because it ain't easy. Oftentimes that's the hardest step. Just just reaching out.
Yeah, and then it's like I don't know, the beauty of whether it's community or even just a couple close people in your life, but to really get to enjoy life together. I think about this Thanksgiving. It was actually me, my partner, my partner's kid and fiance, and then my ex-husband and his new girlfriend. And I don't know. Well, first of all, that constellation, right, is like we've worked hard to be conscious to be able to have those kind of loving relationships, even when there was a divorce and even when there's challenge. But also, there was something this year where I was like, I don't know, we've done it I've had Thanksgiving every year for the past 49 years, but there was something when I actually let myself slow down and enjoy. I'm trying to figure out how to put words to this, but I keep going back to the word precious. It's like, can I be aware of how precious this moment is? Because this moment is never going to happen again with this either constellation of people or with this person across from me going through what they're going through. And how much am I open to experience that? Or like you said, care. I love that, Sylvan. How much am I open to caring for other people? And then how much actually can I receive care? Because that's what I've experienced a lot working with men is a lot of men. We work for a time on can you receive and how much can you receive and what blocks receiving. It's one of my favorite things to work on with men because I think, you guys deserve so much care and love and support. And oftentimes when you're trying to man up and you're stuck inside that man box, you can't really let that in because I've got to, accomplish or posture to get this done or to be seen as manly or lovable. Receiving comes in after midlife.
Yeah, I'm hearing it's a lot more give and take, and you're both bringing up this idea of community and relationships being very important. And I know, Shana, you talked about that transition to king, and that's what the king energy is, right? Like the identity of the king is the kingdom. It's not about the king, right? Like that's a tyrant if it's all about the king. It's about being a shepherd and a benefactor to something that's greater than yourself. And I think that is a total quantum leap for a lot of men because we're always taught to be that solo cowboy, the hero archetype. It's all about us and what we can accomplish in our glory, but once you can transition to your identity, including more than just yourself, maybe it's your family, maybe it's your spiritual community, maybe it's your, local community, whatever it is, right? Even your workplace, it can be so much more rewarding on a different level. And it can really create that legacy component that I hear us talking about in this episode as well.
Yeah, and then just to add to that for guys who do identify as the people pleasers and the ones who are constantly caring for others, I don't think that means, again, there's the gray in the middle, right? I don't think that means you have to give up care. I think it means adding receiving and adding that, relational kind of flow back and forth. You don't have to always, if you like being more of the leader, that's great. But if you also really get honest with yourself, yes, I love being the leader, but sometimes I want to follow, or sometimes I want to make a different choice, or I want someone else to take care of some of these things. Really letting that be part of it because you do get to let go of trying to prove I'm good enough, manly enough, all these things. So what if there was nothing to prove anymore? What if that's part of the doorway or the initiation? And with the humility that you talked about.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think of the Buddhist concept of dana, which is like generosity, where they include the giver being able to receive the fact that they've given in that. Because yeah, the nice guy is like you might think that you're providing for everybody, and maybe you are, but if you're motivated by a sense of inadequacy, if you're motivated by a fear of disappointing others, if you're motivated by insecurity, it doesn't matter how much you give, you're never going to get filled up by that giving. And then kind of what you're saying, Shana, you end up just kind of like, empty, and tapped out. And on the best case, in the worst case, you end up resentful and pissed off and embittered and cynical with the world. I just see that so common with guys. It's not that other people are taking advantage of you. It's often that you can't find the joy in giving. you can't receive the other end of it or be open to being given to.
Yeah, I think that's a big question for people listening. It's like, am I worthy? I think that was kind of my part of my midlife piece is saying, am I worthy of being with a partner who really sees me? Somebody that I can depend on, that I feel really connected to. And like, do I, deserve to be a parent even? Yeah. So ask yourself that question sooner than later. Am I worthy?
Yeah. And I don't know. I want to just put a plug in for that we're all worthy. But I do think there's something about asking yourself that question that takes you on the journey, right? Or like, what makes me worthy? Or I don't know. I think about Alison Armstrong's work where, she's like, she hates the word deserving. And I don't know what she would say about worthy, but it's like, right, that we don't have to work to deserve or work to be worthy. And so can you let yourself be worthy? Or how would you express worthiness? I don't know. How would you kind of live as worthy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really important nuanced point because I agree with you. I think like on the spiritual, transcendental, like realm, everybody is worthy, right? Everybody is worthy, deserving of love. It's unquestioned, and a lot of men feel really insecure. So like, I guess what I would add is like, this idea of proving yourself to yourself that if there is something that you feel like you've been procrastinating, I think of a client who was, super successful. So we're talking about successful, married, wife, kids, whatever, sports car, but is really overweight, right? And he'd been overweight his whole life. And it's been that core insecurity that until he really got serious about his weight, and for this client in particular, his food addiction or his binge eating disorder, you know, until he really looked that demon in the face and started to take meaningful action towards changing that and really working on that, he never felt worthy, you know? And I think the kind of masculine transmission is like, I think you kind of have to do that. Right. If you don't deal with, like I said, that those deficiency levels, they're going to be just a drain on your system constantly. And it's not that he was not worthy because he was overweight. It was because he knew that he was constantly breaking those promises to himself. Right. He tried to get into shape over and over again, and for whatever reason fell off the wagon. Right. He always had that thing to beat himself over the back with when he needed to shame himself. He always had his weight was just a, arm's length away. So by really loving himself and really doing it this time, he was able to get to that place of worthiness, and it opened up every other aspect of his life, you know, um, because he finally let go of that old pattern that I think was keeping him really stuck.
Yeah, I think that piece of being able to look at, like, if you don't feel worthy, come see us, like, because you should, right? And if you do feel, if you're able to connect, because oftentimes we need support. It's for people to mirror what's quality about us, and to feel innately worthy, then it's so much easier to tackle these other things that you want to do to get what you want out of your life. Like, I spoke earlier, it was just speaking to from my own experience of, like, wanting the relationship and the family and stuff, but not everybody wants that, whatever it is that you want, but being able to feel worthy and like you deserve whatever it is that you want that makes you happy and feel fulfilled in your life.
Yeah, you're worthy, and you deserve to give it to yourself, or you deserve to like put in the work, to put in the effort to get out of your own way and like give yourself the best love life possible, right? And that's self-love, right? It's like really investing in yourself and making sure that you are set up for success in the best way that you know how.
Yeah. And I want to speak from the, as a woman, just to bring that some of the things you want or some of the ways you want them, if you are in heterosexual relationships with a lot of women in your life, it might scare them or they might question you. That doesn't mean you're not worthy. And it also doesn't mean that things have to blow up, right? The more you come from this place of sovereignty and creating win-wins with the people in your life instead of like, now I'm going to go for this and I don't know, you fend for yourself, right? It's like, oh, how can this be better for all of us? There are really powerful questions that you can ask, or ways that you can frame these changes that are going on in your life so they don't have to leave people behind, if you don't want that.
Yeah. That makes me think kind of for our final question, piggybacking off of that is, how can you help support a man who's going through a midlife crisis? Because, we've talked about it. I think in our culture, men tend to withdraw, right? Keep everything private, secret, or self-destruct. They're hard to be around because maybe they're drinking too much or they're kind of a dick, but if you're seeing somebody, whether it's, your partner, right, or a family member or a close friend that seems like they're really struggling, what can you do to support somebody who's going through this transition?
I think my first thought is to really see deeper, like notice if they're struggling, even if they're saying that they're not. Um, and to be a reminder that you're not going to love them less or believe in them less, or if you're in a relationship, that if you're a partner to someone, that you're going to want them less, right? Like that you're also willing to do the work to grow, to meet that person as they grow. I think that's a really important way to support someone, because if you hold that person in this little box, or, you're going to get upset if they change because that's uncomfortable for you, then that's not supportive.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think, along those lines, I think pretty much everything that you said there, Shanna, like I've found all of that support in men's group. So I've been part of a men's group for, I don't know, going on 15 years now or something. And I think that's a huge part of what made my midlife transition smoother, is that I had the support of all these guys who either they'd been through it or they were going through it too.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think, I'll do the yes and. It's like, I think men's group or relationships with men, foundational, I would say, like, yes, please do that. And also, if some of your struggles are with women, come to me, ask the questions. I did a call the other night for a group of men, and it was so amazing because they were like, okay, I haven't asked anyone this before, or this feels terrifying to ask. And I'm always like, bring it on. I want to hear it. I want to, I want to love you through it. I want to make it all okay. The full range of your desires and expression is okay. And the one complaint I sometimes have with men's group is that sometimes men try to go home and relate, if they're heterosexual, that they try to relate to a woman, and they don't necessarily have that sense of like what is going on in the women's world. And so I think that's one place where there's just a missing, right? I won't even say there's anything wrong with it. It's just like, I think that's the piece that I sometimes fill in, which is, how do you create the relationships, the love, the intimacy, the sex that you want? Sometimes there's more that you need to process or let go of or understand or learn, and that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, I think having a female brain translator is really critical. Because it's stuff that I think we take for granted as men, and we see the world differently. So having like a woman you can talk to, be like, "Hey, how's this sound?" Right, just give you like a gut check, is really helpful. Or to understand, female conditioning, right, and what women go through in this country, and different blind spots that we have as dudes is really critical, because stuff that we don't think is a big deal can be a huge deal
Yeah.
when you're speaking to your partner.
Yeah. I was working with someone the other day, and he was like, ugh, sometimes the feel, it's just a lot. And we got into his resistance to his wife's emotions and feeling. And I was like, okay, but what if you let go of needing to fix anything or change anything or prove anything? And what if you just go home today and with a more loving, like, just bring your heart, just try and love her and see what happens. And then checked in, and he was like, oh my God, it was really different, right? Because that cycle can happen so quickly where she looks at you and you've got a certain, either you're distracted or there's just like a look in your eye where you're just like, ugh, really? Are you doing this again? And so how do you create the upward spiral, I call it, instead of the downward spiral?
Well, that can be a whole nother podcast, but we do have to wrap up this one now as we're moving towards the end. So, Jana, let's start with you, right? Because you probably interested some of our listeners. Where can they work with you if they want to, get more, learn more about you, or take part in some of your coaching?
Yeah, you can go to my website, shanajamescoaching.com, and Shana is Shana. There's a couple quizzes there, one if you're single, one if you're in a relationship, to see how you could be blocking love, or, what's getting in the way of you having the best love and sex of your life. So you can always take those quizzes. You can book a consultation call with me. I think my TED Talk is on there somewhere. It's called What a Thousand Men's Tears Reveal, about the crisis between men and women. So yeah, reach out if none of those speaks to you. Reach out if you have questions, and I'm here to answer them.
Great. And Silvan, how about for you? If people want to work with you, where can they find you online?
You can find me right here at Men's Therapy Online, and for individual therapeutic coaching, also men's group.
Couples counseling too.
And then if you're in the Boulder area, my private practice is naturalmovementpsychotherapy.com.
Great. Well, love having you both on the show.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm just so grateful that you guys are making this, normalizing it for men, that men need support, and the fact that you are bringing men together and supporting men together, it just warms my heart.
Thank you. That's the mission, is normalizing this stuff, and just not being so serious about it. It's like you can talk about this stuff openly. There's a lot of great resources out there. For the listeners, check out menstherapy.online. That's the hub for everything. There's blogs written by both of these wonderful people, so you can learn more from them. There's also podcast episodes that have them as guests. So if you like what you're hearing, we have tons more stuff with Silvan and Shana, and I'm sure much more coming in the future. So check us all out. We're at menstherapy.online. And like Silvan said, we got individual, we got group, we got couples, and there's a ton of free stuff. We have a Slack channel that's entirely free for men to join. It's confidential and private, so you can start to get support right away and connecting with other guys that just all want to be better and heal together and make the world a better place. So thank you so much, guests, for coming on the show. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.